Good morning, and welcome to the Inquisition Update with Tom Fress. I'm your host, Tom Fress. I'll be with you for the next hour. We're continuing in the book, Rulers of Evil. And we're talking about the Sun Tzuan ruse of the Jesuit general, Lorenzo Ricci, to apparently destroy the Jesuit order and to apparently destroy the papacy in an attempt to disguise as improbable, if not impossible, the Vatican's influence in the founding of this country. It's an extraordinary set of facts and assertions made by our author, F. Tupper Saucy. And we're going to continue in the book where we left off last Friday, chapter 12 in the book, page 109. I'm going to back up a couple paragraphs. The first full paragraph on the page, we're speaking about Louis XV, the King of France, and how the Jesuits were suppressed in France, and that began to trickle down expulsion of the Jesuits from much of Europe. And it says Louis XV was the effective head of the quote-unquote family compact, an agreement between reigning Bourbon monarchs to present a united front before the rest of the world on important measures. Now, this is important for us to understand. Louis XV, the King of France, was the head of an organization known as the Family Compact, an agreement between reigning Bourbon monarchs to present a united front before the rest of the world on important measures. So we're going to see this alliance between all the Bourbon monarchs led by Louis XV take place right here. We're going to describe it. And they're going to put up a front for the rest of the world on this one important measure, and that is the suppression of the Jesuits. That's the clear implication here. He says once he had dissolved the Jesuits in France, he advised other Bourbons to do likewise, although he could not name anything to be gained politically, economically, or financially by the Society of Jesus' dissolution, by the dissolution of the Jesuit order. Now, interestingly, if he can't name anything beneficial for their suppression and extinction, why would he promulgate it and use his headship in the family compact to persuade the rest of the Bourbon kings to do likewise? Continuing the book, it says, the issue still remains puzzling and problematic, according to Professor Malachi Martin, the Jesuit priest, unless considered, I submit, in light of the Sun Tzuan ruse. Now remember, the Sun Tzuan ruse is a Sun Tzuan strategy of war wherein you fake your own death in order to gain an advantage, much like an opossum. You know, when he's put in a corner by a dog or some other attacking animal, and retreat or escape isn't possible, he literally rolls over and pretends to be dead. And what happens to the aggressor, the dog or whatever attacking animal there is? They sniff him a couple times, declare him dead, turn around, walk off, wagging their tails, having defeated him. That's an everyday example of what a Sun Tzuan ruse is. And that's what they're fomenting here. The Jesuits are going to play dead, and at a most appropriate time during the foundation of this country. It says, at any rate, the Bourbon Charles III of Spain followed Louis's advisory. Charles convened a special commission to prepare a master plan for ousting the Jesuits. no one could produce any hard evidence against the society. But there were plenty of rumors. A mob that had risen up to protest a law Charles had passed forbidding the wearing of wide sombreros was said to have been fomented by the Jesuits. A rumor swept across Spain that the Jesuits were nursing a plot to assassinate Charles. The Jesuits supposedly had proof that the king was technically a bastard and should be deposed. None of these rumors were ever substantiated. Moreover, Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci ordered the Jesuits to do nothing to dispel those rumors. Now, it seems rather odd, doesn't it? It says the result was that 46 of the 60 Spanish bishops decided that Spain should follow the Marquis de Pombal and oust the society. And now we're back where we ended the broadcast Friday. It says, and so the commission drafted an expulsion order, which Charles signed on February 27, 1767. The order was executed by ambush, reminiscent of Philip IV's move against the Knights Templar in 1312. Charles sent out sealed envelopes marked not to be opened before sunrise of April 2nd on pain of death to all the provincial viceroys and military commanders. When sunrise came and the recipients opened their envelopes, they discovered 2 letters inside. The first ordered them to place troops around the Jesuit residences and colleges during the night of April 2nd to arrest all Jesuits and to arrange for them to be placed aboard waiting ships at certain docks. If a single Jesuit, concluded the king, even though sick or dying, is still to be found in the area under your command after the embarkation, prepare yourself to face summary execution, unquote. So there is a very strict command to get all the Jesuits on those boats, or else. And it says the second letter, remember there were 2, the second letter was a copy of King Charles' original order of expulsion, which began, quote, being swayed by just and legitimate reasons, which shall remain sealed within my royal breast forever, unquote, and went on to say that, quote, all members of the Society of Jesus are to leave my kingdoms, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and other formerly independent kingdoms that made up Spain, and all their goods are declared forfeit by virtue of the highest power which the Lord God Almighty has confided into my hands, unquote. The king made sure to discourage any investigation into the causes. Quote, it is not for subjects to question the wisdom or seek to interpret the decisions of their sovereign, unquote. See how lovely a monarchical form of government is? They can do whatever they want without telling the people and without even entertaining questions about it. And that's the form of government we have in this country now. Despite all outward appearances, that's the form of government we have. And it's becoming more like a papal monarchy every day. Only days before April 2nd, the Spanish ambassador to the Holy See presented a document from Charles to Pope Clement XIII that explained, quote, Your Holiness knows well as anyone else that a sovereign's first duty is to ensure the peace of his dominions and the tranquility of his subjects. In the fulfillment of this sovereign task, I found it necessary to expel all the Jesuits residing in my kingdoms and to commit them directly to your Holiness's wise stewardship in the states of the Church, that is, the papal states in Italy. He says, I beg your Holiness to consider that my decision is unalterable and has been made as a result of mature reflections of all due consideration for the consequences, unquote. Pope Clement, the likelihood of whose submission to the will of Lorenzo Ricci should not be underestimated, responded in a melodramatic vein, as though playing for an audience, quote, "Of all the shocks that I've had to endure in the 9 unhappy years of my pontificate, this is, of which your majesty has informed me, is the worst," unquote. The Pope had little more to say, except that the king may have placed himself in danger of excommunication, that is, eternal damnation. The order was executed during the night of April 2nd and 3rd. Some 6,000 Jesuits were rounded up throughout Spain. They were crammed into the lower decks of 21 warships. On May of 1767, the gruesome fleet appeared off Civitavecchia, the port of the Papal States, and amazingly was fired upon by shore artillery. The ships were denied permission to land their human cargo by the order of the Pope himself, pursuant to a conference with Lorenzo Ricci. Historians are at a loss to explain why Pope Clement, so devoted to the Jesuits, would impose such cruelty upon his beloveds in their hour of need. The most plausible answer, I would suggest, is that his understanding was obedient to the unscrutable command of his general, whose exceedingly private objective, after all, was to disqualify the Society of Jesus and the Roman Catholic Church as viable enemies of Protestantism, at least in the North American colonies. No longer enemies, they could develop personal alliances. The suffering priests, the guns of Civitavecchia, were all explained in Amiot's Sun Tzu. Quote, "Your army, accustomed to not knowing your plans, will be equally unaware of the peril which threatens it. A good general takes advantage of everything, but he can only do that because he has operated in the greatest secrecy, because he knows how to remain cool-headed, and because he governs with uprightness. At the same time, however, his men are constantly misled by what they see and what they hear. He manages for his troops never to know what they must do or what orders they must receive. If his own people are unaware of his plans, how can the enemy discover them?" Unquote. Over the next few months, thousands of Jesuits were expelled from the remaining Bourbon states of Naples, Parma, Malta, and Spanish America. Jesuits in French America, that is Quebec, and New England were left undisturbed, as were those in Austria. Interestingly. And it says in October of 1768, the Austrian Empress Maria Theresa, a Habsburg, wrote her Jesuit confessor, Father Koffler, quote, "My dear father, there's no cause for concern. As long as I'm alive, you have nothing to fear," unquote. But Maria Theresa hoped to marry her 2 daughters to Bourbon princesses, Caroline to the son of the Spanish king, and Maria Antoinette to the son of Louis XV. Bourbon ambassadors advised her that unless she expelled the Jesuits, she might have to look elsewhere for sons-in-law. The Empress reneged on her promise to Father Koffler, expelled the Jesuits, and the girls got their men. And F. Tupper Saucy informs us that Marie Antoinette's marriage would end with the execution of her husband, Louis XVI, in January of 1793. 9 months later, she would die the same way, decapitated by the guillotine. Now listen to this. This device bears the name of the French revolutionist who in 1792 first suggested its use in administering the death penalty, Dr. Joseph Guillotine, Dr. Guillotine was a disestablished Jesuit. Did you know the guillotine was created by a Jesuit priest? Why would we be surprised that the guillotine was created by a Jesuit priest? In January of 1769, the ambassadors from France, Spain, and Portugal visited Clement XIII to demand, quote, the complete and utter suppression of the Society of Jesus, unquote. Clement called for a special consistory of the College of Cardinals to deliberate the question. But when the cardinals convened February 3rd, it was not to discuss Bourbon ultimatums, but to choose Clement's successor. For the 76-year-old Pope had died the night before of an quote-unquote apoplectic attack, said the official record, a heart attack attributed to the pressures applied by the Bourbon diplomats. I would rather suppose that possibly he was murdered, but F. Tupper Saucy doesn't say so. Anyway, he says, for nearly 3 months, one question charged the turbulent conclave. Should the next pope be for or against the Jesuits? The cardinal's choice of Lorenzo Ganganelli was a triumph for Lorenzo Ricci. Although Ganganelli was a Franciscan, he had colleged with the Jesuits as a special consultant to the Holy Roman Inquisition. His celebrated book, Diatriba Theologica of 1743, had been dedicated to Ignatius Loyola. Moreover, Ganganelli literally owed his papacy to Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general, as it was Ricci who had sponsored his nomination for cardinal in 1759. Almost immediately after receiving the red hat, Ganganelli had shown evidence of cooperating with General Ricci's strategy of gradually disestablishing the Society of Jesus. Oxford Book of Popes indicates a sudden and unexplained habit change. Quote, hitherto regarded as a friend of the Jesuits, Cardinal Ganganelli now distanced himself from them, unquote. And now, a decade later, calling himself Clement XIV, Ganganelli presented what the Catholic Encyclopedia calls, quote, listen carefully, in appearance, a hostile attitude, unquote, toward the Jesuits. A quote-unquote apparent hostility, and a theatrical hostility that masks an involved loyalty toward the society. Clement XIV would do whatever was necessary to help the society win victory without doing battle, even if it meant obliterating the society. The Bourbons needed appeasing. Hastily, Clement promised Charles III of Spain forthcoming documents necessary to, quote, proclaim to all the world the wisdom of your Majesty's decision to expel the Jesuits as unruly and rebellious subjects, unquote. He assured Louis XV of France also of a, quote, plan for the complete suppression of the society, unquote. On Maundy, Thursday, 1770, Clement omitted the annual reading of In Cone Domini, which means on the Lord's Supper, an annual reading of a papal bull. It says the omission was an astonishing statement. This celebrated bull, first proclaimed in 1568 by Pope Pius V, arrogantly reminded kings that they were but vassals to the papacy. And remember, this bull was read annually to remind the Bourbon kings that they were but vassals to the papacy. This pope suspended the reading of that bull that year. It says, suddenly discontinuing this assertion flatly, the royal self-importance, exciting crowned heads to stay on the anti-Jesuit, anti-church track so necessary for the fulfillment of Lorenzo Ricci's secret designs in England and America. Now, this is interesting. They have secret designs both in England and America. Now, what we're seeing here is the formation of a Hegelian dialectic, the Jesuit strategy to foment a discord between people who are usually at peace and to exacerbate that animosity or division, and as usual, finance both sides of the conflict and have Jesuits operating on both sides of the line as advisors to manage the outcome of the conflict and then be there to negotiate the terms of settlement after the conflict. They're about to foment an unreconcilable difference between Protestant Great Britain and the new colonies in America. The new Protestant colonies in America. At the same time, they're orchestrating the complete suppression and extinction of the Jesuits throughout all of Europe, and a diminution of the papacy itself. Now, it's not a stretch of anyone's imagination to imagine that all of this is orchestrated for a particular reason, for a particular purpose. And it's only when one becomes familiar with the Articles of War, the Articles of Sun Tzuan War, that all this makes sense. And remember, Lorenzo Ricci was a Sun Tzuan warrior, having read Sun Tzu's Article of War and knowing all about the Sun Tzuan ruse. Now, you have to understand that the stakes are awful high, because popular Protestant government was about to raise its head in the Western Hemisphere. All the powers of Europe could not have invaded and conquered this country, not without incurring extraordinary expense. And if popular government were allowed to succeed here in the colony, then popular government might find root in Europe and would put the Bourbon kings on a slow boat to China. The Pope had a great deal at stake, and so did the Black Papacy, even enough to fake the death of both the Jesuit order and the Roman Catholic Church. We'll continue with the reading of Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy when we get back from the break.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the Inquisition Update. Now, we're continuing in the book, Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy. We're showing the complicity of Clement XIV in his suspension of the annual reading of the papal bull, which reminded the kings of Europe that they were but vassals to the papacy. He suspended that reading to flatter the kings of Europe, to continue their anti-Jesuit and anti-Catholic Church track that played along with Lorenzo Ricci's secret designs for England and America, and those designs made them more clandestine with the overwhelming shock of knowing that the Jesuits were suppressed and the papacy itself was on the ropes. Okay, this was a covert operation so that no one would suspect Jesuit or Vatican involvement in what is about to transpire between Protestant England and the Protestant colonies of the West. And he says, it surely evidences Clement's involvement in the strategy of feigning weakness, faking weakness, in order to conceal what Sun Tzu called, quote, an order that nothing can interrupt, unquote. The non-reading of the papal bull In Coena Domini rang the death knell of the strong-armed white papacy as manifest by Ritchie's political theorist Justinian Febronius in his 1763 masterpiece On the State of the Church and the Legitimate Power of the Roman Pontiff, about which more will be presented. It says, for more than 80 years, the papacy had supported Rome-based members of the Stuart monarchs exiled from England for being Roman Catholics. Not only did Clement XIV diminish this tradition to almost nothing, in 1772 he began extending a highly visible and most cordial hospitality to the Protestant King George III and his family. Now we see the papacy warming up to a Protestant king. Okay, that fits the design as well. Remember, they have to be able to operate clandestinely on both sides of the line. So the papacy is extending cordial hospitality to the Protestant King of England to try to gain his trust and to catch him messing up or to use him for a certain purpose. And it says this tableau was enormously disturbing to American Protestants who at that time were having extreme difficulties with King George III of England, which these difficulties were fomented as well. Remember, there's Jesuits working on this side of the line too. So they've already got this discord going. The Vatican's warming up to King George III to play down any possible role that the Jesuits or the Vatican might be having in the situation. It says the prospect of England reuniting with Rome gave them all more reason to strive for what Lorenzo Ritchie wanted, their independence. So here's the effect that it had in the colonies when they saw the Pope warming up to George III, that Britain might be ready to fall back into Catholicism. And what would the Protestants want to do? They would want to separate from Catholic Great Britain. See how the Sun Tzuan warrior prepares his enemy to do exactly what he wants him to do, to defeat themselves in battle without raising a sword, without drawing any blood, but to maneuver the psyche of your enemy to get him to do what you want him to do without even raising a sword. That's what they're fomenting here. He says, finally, in July 21st, 1773, Clement XIV delivered on his promise by signing the brief Dominus Ac Redemptor Noster. He calls it a brief. There's researchers that argue that this is not a brief, it's a bull. It has the character of infallibility. A bull is infallible, according to Roman law, and can't be reversed because it's divinely inspired. It's infallible, so this bull can't be reversed. If it's a brief, apparently there's some loophole in that design, but I'm not going to engage in the argument one way or another. It's just that we need to know that Pope Clement XIV issued this document, whether it be a brief or a bull, Dominus Ac Redemptor Noster, in other words, God and our Redeemer, to suppress the Jesuits, to make it final, to make it official, to make it registered in church history, in church law, in canon law. And it says the brief, or the bull, whichever side you take on this, dissolved, suppressed, disbanded, and abolished the Society of Jesus for all eternity, so as to establish a real and enduring peace within the church. All the Jesuits' offices, authorities, and functions were declared null and void, and all their houses, colleges, hospices, and any other place occupied by them to be hereby disestablished, no matter in what province, state, or kingdom they might be found. Clement appointed 5 cardinals, an archbishop, a bishop, and 2 theologians, and other ecclesiastical dignitaries to supervise this disestablishment of the Jesuits. None of the confiscated Jesuit records, correspondence, and accounts showed any incriminating evidence. You don't suppose this was so well orchestrated that they took all the incriminating evidence out of the record so well ahead of time that nothing would be found at the time of the promulgation of this bull. Certainly, there wouldn't be anything incriminating in the Jesuits' records, would there? I'd love to walk through the archives of the Jesuit provincial in my Jesuit province. I'm certain I would find all kinds of incriminating evidence. It says, although Lorenzo Ricci lived a short walk from the Pope's palace at St. Peter's, notice of the disestablishment was not served upon him until mid-August. Guards took the general into custody at his offices in number 45 Piazza del Gesù. They removed him to the English College a few blocks away. The English College a few blocks away. That's interesting. They moved him to the English College a few blocks away. He remained there 5 weeks. Things were then happening in England and America that made Ritchie's presence at the English College extraordinarily significant. We shall consider those happenings in the forthcoming chapter. Toward the end of September, Lorenzo Ricci was taken from the English College to Castle St. Angelo, a medieval fortress whose dungeons suggest a prison. His detention was probably less demeaning than we might imagine, as St. Angelo's contained quite elegant rooms. Popes often used them as a convenient resort from administrative stresses. In fact, a secret underground tunnel connected St. Angelo's to the papal palace at the Vatican. It would be consistent with Lorenzo Ricci's position and strategy for him to stay in personal, secret contact with Clement XIV by means of this tunnel. Clearly, F. Tupper Saucy is implicating a very close and intimate clandestine relationship between Lorenzo Ricci and Pope Clement XIV even after his arrest. Why? Because they were working on a strategy to make certain that the colonies broke loose from Great Britain for a very specific reason and for a very specific goal. It was a prize that the Vatican must have, that the Jesuit order must have at all costs, even at the cost of suppressing the Jesuit order completely and destroying what appeared to be all the power of the Vatican. Now, what do you suppose would be a prize that valuable to essentially fake the death of the Jesuit order, or in actuality to suppress the Jesuits throughout all Europe? It has to be big. And it was big. It's called the United States of America. It says, on September 22nd, 1774, the first anniversary of Ritchie's detention at St. Angelo, Clement XIV died. He was 69. He had suffered the last year of his life in severe depression, it was said, with morbid paranoia over assassination. His corpse decomposed rapidly, feeding rumors of death by poison, rumors which his famous last words tended to confirm. Quote, "Mercy, mercy, capulsus feci. I was compelled to do it," he said. For many years afterwards, historians would wonder just whom Ganganelli was addressing. God? A vengeful Jesuit assassin? Ritchie? What was, quote-unquote, it he was compelled to do. Disestablish the Jesuits, commit suicide? The definitive answer may never be known because the Pope's personal papers and effects decomposed as rapidly as his flesh. What is quite known, though, is that the death of Clement XIV, as stated in the Oxford Book of Popes, quote, brought the prestige of the papacy to its lowest level in centuries, unquote, which is precisely what Lorenzo Ricci needed for his American Revolution to happen. We now proceed to examine the structured darkness of the men who led the attack against the Society of Jesus. It was the same darkness from whence come not only the Englishmen who turned their kingdom into a hated tyranny, but also the Americans who advocated rebellion against that tyranny. The darkness is called Freemasonry, and it is the subject of our next chapter. Now we're going to find how Freemasonry played a key critical role in the fomentation of a division between Protestant Great Britain and the Protestant colonies, working on both sides of the line, much like the Jesuits do. Interesting comparison, isn't it? Chapter 13 is entitled The Secret Bridge. It begins with a quote by Stephen C. Bullock in his Revolutionary Brotherhood of 1996. He says, the papal prohibition might even have encouraged Masonry by identifying opposition to the group with Catholic tyranny and superstition, unquote. Continuing with the text, it says, the New Catholic Encyclopedia identifies the men who attacked the Society of Jesus as the radical devotees of the rationalistic Enlightenment. Richly talented and influential writers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and other philosophers among the encyclopedists, the followers of Freemasonry, and high-placed government officials, unquote. Attacking the Jesuits was for them, quote, a step toward their ultimate objective of abolishing all religious orders, the papacy, and finally the church itself, unquote. The masterpiece of the encyclopedists, most of whom happened to be philosophers, was the monumental Encyclopedia of Sciences, Arts, and Trades of 1743 to 1751. The encyclopedia was the flame of the Enlightenment, the fulfillment of Cardinal Wolsey's dream of flooding the world with print containing learning against learning. Remember, it was propaganda designed to occupy men's minds, to keep them from reading the Bible. See, the Bible was recently in print. People were devouring the Bible. The Bible fueled the Protestant Reformation. It occupied the minds of those who were learning to read. They had God's Word in their own hands. They'd never heard it but by the mouth of a Roman Catholic priest. And they became like Bereans. They read the Bible daily to see if those things were so. And they found out they were not so. And they didn't need a pope. They didn't need a priest. They didn't need to confess their sins to a sinful man. They didn't need absolution from a man. That Christ was the head of the church, not the pope, and that men were all equal, not hierarchical, like it was in the old Roman Empire. So in order to combat that new hunger for the Scriptures, they flooded the literary market with fodder for those who had recently learned to read, to draw their attention away from the Bible, to take the fuel, the Scriptures, away from the Protestant Reformation. It worked just about as good as Bible burning, but it didn't anger anybody. learning against learning, propaganda, all sorts of information in written form that would draw a man's attention away from the Bible. Well, do we have anything like that happening today? We have every kind of distraction. We have the television that constantly occupies men's minds and time with vain debate and argument and controversy, of which the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church and their design for this country is never mentioned, never even implied, not even skirted around. And it's entertainment. It occupies the vast portion of a man's idle time. Television. Why pick up the Bible and read when you can sit on your butt and watch television and be entertained all day? And that's why our churches are suffering. That's why Christianity is suffering in this country. The Jesuits have accomplished their aim. They've taken us away from the Scriptures by giving us entertainment and baloney, false information, engaging us in heated political debates, engaging us in controversial discussions that have absolutely nothing to do with the truth. Learning against learning. The Jesuits are masters at it. And it said it brought so much learning, this learning against learning, this flooding of information, secular information, non-biblical information. It brought so much learning, secular learning as against scriptural learning, that it became its own paradigm, demanding radical change in existing norms. The Enlightenment called for a new age that placed reason above any church, above even the Bible. The New Age issued the elegant neo-Gnostic religion of deism, the thinking man's alternative to Roman Catholicism and its imperious hold on the human conscience. Nowhere was deism more methodically practiced than, quote, around the altars of Freemasonry, unquote, as the great Masonic scholar Albert Pike put it. Here wrote Pike in his influential book, Morals and Dogma, the Bible of Freemasonry, published in 1871, quote, "The Christian, the Hebrew, the Muslim, the Brahmin, the followers of Confucius and Zoroaster can assemble as brethren and unite in prayer to the one God who is above all gods," unquote. And as we'll discover, the God of Freemasonry is Lucifer. Lucifer is spelled with a capital G, and the God of heaven in Albert Pike's book is spelled with a small g. He says, "The brethren prayerfully climb the Gnostic pyramid of successive illumination until it is hoped a oneness with the supreme God with a capital G is attained. As Albert Pike explains, the deists, like the papacy, look upon the Bible as something of a stumbling block. Quote, "The Freemason does not pretend to dogmatic certainty, nor vainly imagine such certainty attainable. He considers that if there were no written revelation, he could safely rest the hopes that animate him and the principles that guide him on the deductions of reason and the convictions of instinct and consciousness. He studies the wonders of the heavens, the framework and revolutions of the earth, the mysterious beauties and adaptations of animal existence, the moral and material constitution of the human creature, so fearfully and wonderfully made, and is satisfied that God is," unquote. So that's the conclusion, that God is. that's enough for man, right? Is that what the Bible says? It says a fool says in his heart there is no God. As a matter of fact, it's not enough to know that God exists. It's not even enough to know that Jesus existed or that Jesus is the Son of God, because even the demons who saw Christ at a distance said, "What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth, Son of the Most High?" Isn't that a full acknowledgement that Jesus was the Son of God? But they were demons that acknowledged him as Jesus, Son of the Most High. But for Freemasons, it's well enough just to know that God is, by any name you choose to call him. That's all there is to deism. And all religions, in one form or another, all worship basically the same God. And I'll just remind the listeners that philosophy is what defines Freemasonry. You know, there are many untruths, but only one truth. Truth is a singularity. But deism is plurality of deities. There's not one truth in deism. There's all kinds of permutation of lies. That's what deism is. And that's what Freemasonry is. And ultimately, it's Luciferianism. It's Satan worship. If you don't worship the one true God of creation, you're worshiping a figment of your own imagination. Because there is but one God, and he created the heavens and the earth and all that in them is. And he gave us his Son to die for us, to be our propitiation. Albert Pike never knew him. And it would be hard for any Freemason to say that he knows him. We'll continue with the book Rulers of Evil tomorrow on the broadcast. Stay tuned for Nicholas Arthur and Cross the Border. Cross the border into Christ's heavenly kingdom. We'll see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.